I'm Tina Fallon. I am a real estate agent with Realty Collective, where I have been for 17 years. And I work with Victoria Alexander, who founded the company to defy real estate agency norms. And so we are here to be your coach, your therapist, your sounding board, and get you through the emotional roller coaster of selling in New York City, and to make that process as low stress as possible, and to really tailor the process so that it suits your needs as a seller. And I am joined by Rashidah Siddiqui.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rashidah Siddiqui. I'm a real estate attorney. Have been practicing for 20 years now. My office is located downtown Brooklyn, but I'm licensed and represent clients in all of the boroughs and also in northern New Jersey. My firm is Serpico and Siddiqui PC. I represent sellers a lot, so I'm here to kind of give advice as you think about putting your property on the market, or think about just what you need in terms of selling, the legal aspects and paperwork that you would need. Here to give that information. I look forward to speaking.
All right, I muted myself. We also have Victoria Alexander of Realty Collective here for just a couple more minutes. If you have questions for her, you can put those in the chat too. All right, so you're here in October of 2023, and we always start with a kind of question of why sell now? It's really interesting time, not just in the world, but in the real estate market in New York City. And so if you're here, you are obviously taking all of that into consideration and still thinking about selling. So there's a lot of reasons to sell in New York. It's even in times when it's challenging, there's always buyers. There's high demand for real estate in New York City. And if you are going through a life change, if you're transitioning either to a larger place or a smaller place, if you're selling to leave the city, I'm so sorry, but sometimes people do have to leave New York. We understand, and we're here to kind of help understand how to get through this process so that it is as manageable and profitable for you as possible. So right now, because of the high interest rates, the market has slowed substantially, but prices are still quite high because there's so little inventory available. So if you've been following what's happening in kind of national trends, prices are down year over year. In New York, that's really not so true, and particularly for certain kinds of properties that are very high demand, including townhouses, condos with outdoor space, high amenity buildings with low common charges. Those kinds of properties are going to be quick to find buyers, especially if you price it correctly. And the other thing about New York is that rent is really high. So ownership is expensive in New York, sure, but at least it is stable, and you're always going to find people who are transitioning out of rental market and want to own their own home. So if you're ready to leave New York, or if you're ready to transition to either a bigger or a smaller place, now might be a decent time to sell. And then let's talk about things to take into consideration when you're thinking. So the market, everybody says, is the market good? Is the market bad? It doesn't really matter. There's always going to be a market for your place, but the market has been in a constant state of flux since before even COVID. And so a lot of what we do is help people understand, what does it mean to be listing your property at this kind of nanosecond, and how can you situate yourself in the history of sales in New York City so that your expectations are in alignment with what with the reality of the moment. The low inventory is a really helpful consideration if you're considering selling. Interest rates have made it so that money is twice as expensive to borrow as it was a couple of years ago. So buyers have adjusted to these high interest rates, and that's great, but their budgets have adjusted to the high interest rates as well. So if somebody in your building sold something in 2022 for $1 million, your unit may not be able to get that same number. Then again, it really depends on the unit and and how everything is. But it is harder for qualified buyers to afford homes that they used to. And Rashidah will get into a little bit of the issues that the banks are sometimes having with lending as well. Look, I'm pushing that onto you, Rashidah. So the key is always, if you have a property that is priced correctly and your expectations are reasonable, it's always a good time to sell. But it may not be good if you have, say, purchased the home recently and you have not hit what we call your break-even horizon. So usually in New York City, that's about 5 years, and that's the time it takes for prices to increase to the point where you can recoup not just the purchase price of the home, but also your closing costs, which are quite high, both when you buy and when you sell. There's other considerations if you haven't held the property for that long, or even if you've held it for a long time and now you have a lot of capital gains exposure. 1031 tax exchanges, which Rashidah can get into a little bit later, are one way that you can defer the tax penalties associated with sales. And as you look through on these bullet points, I'm actually going to slide over to Rashidah to get a little bit more into the intricacies of, if you've held your place long enough and you're going to make a ton of money when you sell, here's what you need to consider.
Yeah, so definitely, as Tina said, some things that you have to consider when you're thinking about selling. In New York is one of the states where you have both a New York City and New York State transfer taxes, which is based on your selling price. New York State, the price is 0.4% of your sales price. In New York City, it's 1% or 1.425%. So that's really, you're looking at about 2% alone just for your New York City and New York State transfer taxes when you're selling your property. Other things, depending on the type of property you're selling, if it's a co-op, your building may have what we call a flip tax, which, depending on the building, can be determined on the number of shares you own, or a percentage of your profit, or just a percentage of your sales price. So always a good opportunity to speak with your management company or your board to find out if there's a flip tax. I have a client, the flip tax is a sliding scale. So the longer you held onto the property, the lower the flip tax is. If you've held on to it for 7 years or more, it's 1%. But if it's 1 year and you're looking to sell it, it's a 7% flip tax. So right now you can see that client would have 7% flip tax, 2% transfer taxes. Right there is 9% of their sales price alone, just in taxes that they're not getting. And a flip tax goes to the co-op. It doesn't go to the state. It's something that a co-op retains. So if you have a co-op that you're looking to sell, definitely think about, does it have a flip tax in that building? Some condominiums have what we call as option fees, which is similar to a flip tax, but you don't see that as often. But once again, you may want to speak with your condo board, condo management company to find out what fees the condominium has in regard to selling a property. Other things to consider when you're selling a property as far as closing costs is going to be your realtor commission, your attorney fee. If you have any open real estate taxes, any open utilities like water, all of those things have to be paid off at the closing, in addition to any mortgages that you may have on the property. So you can always have your agent or your attorney go through it and give you like an estimate of where your closing costs are going to be. If this property wasn't your primary residence, so it's an investment property, you want to think about capital gains, because that's something that you have to pay. And even also, if it was your primary residence, depending on how long you own the property, there may be some capital gains that you have to pay. There's an exemption of up to $250,000 per individual. It's $500,000 if you're a couple, if you've used the property for 2 out of the last 5 years as your primary residence. But after that, now you have capital gains that you may be subject to. If your property, as I said, is investment property, you're going to have capital gains. So you want to think about what that may be. It can be, as high as sometimes 30%, sometimes higher than that, depending on your income bracket and how long you held on to the property. But you can think about things like a 1031 exchange. That's a separate kind of, we can do like a 1 hour just on that, but just to something to think about. It's really, you're selling investment property and you're going to buy another investment property and you're deferring the capital gain. So you don't have to give it to the IRS at that time. You're basically kind of delaying it till you finally stop selling it all. So it's what we call it a deferment of your capital gains. But it is a way for people to continue to buy investment property and go on forward without having to pay that capital gains when you do your taxes. So those are just some things just on the monetary end that you need to consider, which is very important because when you get to your closing and you're like doing your numbers and you want to make sure that all your expenses are covered, but then also how much money are you getting and walking away with at the end of the day, especially if you're looking to use those funds to purchase something else, or you're not purchasing, you're retiring and you're doing, moving away or something like that to run. You want to know how much funds you're going to be getting.
Yeah, this is something that's, I think, really important to go through with your financial planner, with your attorney, and with your real estate agent to make sure that selling the home isn't going to leave you in a worse financial position than you were previously. If you're selling voluntarily, obviously. And there are alternatives to selling too. Sometimes it makes sense to hang on to the property and say rent it out to somebody for a period of time until maybe interest rates come down and you can afford to buy more with the proceeds from the sale of your home. Or maybe if you want to purchase something else, you can take out a home equity line of credit and use it if what you're doing is trying to access funds that are the equity that you have invested in your home. Sometimes there are ways for you to extract that equity without having to sell the house, if selling the house is going to put you in a worse position than you were before. So we're not here to push people to sell. It's always a good idea to hold on to real estate in New York City if you can. So we don't think everybody should be selling their homes. Even in a great market, it's not always a great time to sell your home. So we really want to go through with people and take the time and plan to make sure that selling is the right thing for you specifically. All right, so let's say you're ready, you're feeling like, okay, I'm ready, I do want to sell. So let's make sure you've got what people are looking for. So do you have a home that is what people are, in the market for? Even if you don't, we can always find there's always a buyer. There's a buyer for every property, but things that people really love right now, people don't want to do work on the homes. We're finding that there are a lot of people who were really scared off by the supply chain issues and the lack of available contractors after the pandemic. And so people really looking to move into a turnkey home, and people seem to be willing to pay more for that. It used to be like there's like starter homes where people would really want to do a lot of renovations. We see a little bit less of that. That said, as interest rates have gone up, we're seeing a lot sort of reflecting that we're seeing interest in homes that do require work because people want to put less money into it upfront. So there's also really important rule that we have, which is just you only need one buyer. So even if you have something that isn't what the market is looking for, it's like, no, I don't have a driveway, I don't have a backyard, I don't have I have a huge flip tax, things that make it seem like it's harder to sell, there's always going to be a buyer out there for you. What we also want to make sure is that you have a plan for what you're going to do after you sell. So this goes back to, I think, what we were just talking about is making sure you go through with your attorney and you understand what your closing costs are going to be, or your projected closing costs are going to be, so that you know roughly how much money you can expect to walk away with from the sale of the home, and also speaking to your financial planner to know how much of that you're going to owe to the government down the line. We like talking you through your whole plan. So we figure you're starting here and you're going to go to here, and somewhere about here is the sale of your home. But we want to get you all the way from point A to point B, and understanding what point B is for you, understanding where you want to be on the far side of this sale is as important to this process as marketing the home is. We really want to get you through all the way through to where you want to be on the far side. All right, so we've talked it through. It's time for you to assemble your team before you list your home. Not only do you need a real estate broker, you really need to have your real estate attorney before you think about putting your home on the market. We really want you to talk to an attorney first. When you speak to your real estate agent, we have we're going to share with you, I think, some bullet points of like questions to ask real estate agents. You really want to make sure you've got somebody who's an expert in your neighborhood, an expert in your building. For example, if you live in a co-op and there's somebody who's sold a lot of places in your building, that's always a good person to interview when you're looking for somebody to represent you. You want somebody though who also understands the wider market. Sometimes there's somebody who's been working in a building for so long that they undervalue the homes that are there, for example. You want somebody who really understands like how to reach the market that you are, the buyers that you're looking for. And you want people who understand not just your home itself, but also the neighborhood and the dynamics that are at play in the market right now. So you really want somebody who has good industry contacts. So we're a very small company at Realty Collective. We're actually quite small, independent, woman-owned company, but we're members of the Real Estate Board of New York, and we work on the same platforms that all of the larger Compass and Corcoran work. Sometimes you want a really big company. Some people really like having that big brand behind them. Some people want more of a personal touch. They want to know that they're not just one small transaction in a kind of sea of transactions. You want more of a bespoke experience. So be clear with yourself about what it is that you're looking for, and then go out and find those people. Your attorney is, you can ask your friends, somebody, get some referrals from people. You definitely want to have somebody who is a New York City real estate attorney with experience in the property type that you're selling. So, Rashidah, you come to mind.
So definitely, people always think, oh, well, do I need an attorney in New York? You definitely need an attorney. I guess just off the bat, the buyer's down payment has to be held in an escrow account. So your attorney has to be a licensed New York attorney because they have to have an escrow account. And real estate attorneys have a specific account called an IRA account to hold those funds. So you want to make sure that the attorney is licensed in New York. You want to ask them how long they've been practicing. Do they practice real estate? How many, what percentage of their firm is real estate? Because really you want somebody dedicated to the sale of your property. Your attorney is going to be reviewing the liens, the title search, the lien search. They have to prepare your deed or the closing documents. So you want to make sure that you have an attorney that is versed and knows what documents have to be prepared. I can go on with lots of horror stories with attorneys that are not prepared. And as a real estate attorney, I've had to come in to kind of get them to that closing because I want to make sure my client gets to a closing. But it really holds up your deal if your attorney does not know what they're doing as a seller as well. Because if something is on the title and the attorney misses it, it can really derail your deal as a seller. So you want to make sure that your attorney really does practice real estate in New York. But yeah, you definitely need an attorney for a sale transaction as well, and as a purchaser as well.
Yeah, and also it's with your agent and with your attorney before you put your home on the market. It's really important that we do we do some due diligence on the home itself. So we want to make sure that if there are any issues that you're going to be encountering in your sale, that those are things that we are all aware of, and we're working on either solving those problems or making sure that we know who we're looking for in a buyer so that we have somebody who can work around those problems. So Rashidah, can you just give a couple of examples of those issues?
I'm a seller. A couple of things that you want to start putting together or put aside as you start thinking about packing up your paperwork and cleaning out everything and shredding. I always tell clients, put aside any paperwork that has to do with anything with the property. If you can find your deed, not so important now because you can always pull up your deed on the city's website called Acris and get that information. But still, if you have your original deed, put that to the side. If you have your owner's policy, which is a title insurance policy, Different than your homeowner's insurance. It's called an owner's title policy. And you would have got that when you purchased your property. It basically tells you that when you bought the property, there was no title issues. So now when you're going to sell it, as long as you haven't done anything in between that time period, there should not be any issues that come up. And if there is something that was missed or wasn't filed correctly, that policy that you got when you purchased can be used to make sure that you get to the closing and the issue is cleared up pretty quickly if you have that owner's title policy. So look through your documents. You may have got it at your closing. Your attorney who represented you when you purchased may have given it to you afterwards, but it's normally about a 5 or 10-page document, and it will say owner's title policy. Other things that you should look through to see if you have a survey. Survey is basically like a diagram. It tells you the metes and bounds of your property. Always good to have as well. Once again, if you don't have it, not a big deal, but always good to have, because if there was an issue that came up when you bought the property, it will come up on the survey. If you put up a fence during your ownership, or you took down a fence, or you put a deck, or you added something to the property, those things would be on the survey, or would not be on the survey. So it's always good if you have a survey of the property, so you'll see that. If you refinanced your property during the ownership, always put that aside as well, because there's times, and unfortunately it happens, where the satisfaction wasn't recorded for the mortgage that you paid off when you refinance, so it's still showing up as open on the property, and now we have to go and find the paperwork, or the attorney or the lender that took over that loan and was, or the title company that was supposed to pay it off. So it's good if you have that paperwork, because hey, I refinanced in 2000. Here's a copy of the paperwork. It shows that it was paid off. Here's a copy of the check. We can go to the title company and get that taken care of pretty quickly with those documentations. So really, any documentation that you have related to the property, put it aside, scan it if you can. If it's an original, definitely hold on to it. If it's not, scan it, put it aside so that your attorney can have that if necessary. Also, things that you should kind of look up, you can look up to see if there's violations on your property. Sidewalk violations happen sometimes, and clients don't realize it. They may got a notice from the city, or the city may have fixed the sidewalks and put a violation on the property. So you always want to try to look up to see if there's any housing, HPD, which is Housing Preservation Department violations, Department of Buildings violations. If you had work done on the property, did your contractor take out all of the necessary permits? If they did they close out those permits? Electrical, plumbing. So all of these things, the more you have up front when you put in the property on the market, the easier it is to address those either prior to getting into contract, or once we're in contract, you have a heads up on getting those things taken care of. So the main things are your deed, your survey, owner's policy, looking up violations on the property as well.
Yeah, and the other thing is that if you don't have these things, so if you can't find any of your paperwork, or it all burned in a fire, or there are violations on the property, or there are some open permits, those are all things that we could all work together as a team to get you through all of those steps. And if there's something that you can't resolve, then we may know. It doesn't mean that you can't actually sell your home. It means that we may be looking for a cash buyer, or we may be looking for someone who is a bank that is willing to close on a loan with an open violation. And there are options out there. That's why it's just easier for us all to know beforehand, so that we understand who we're looking for when we're soliciting buyers for the property. So just because even if you feel like, oh no, it's terrible, I can't do this, I did a completely unpermitted renovation to my house, believe it or not, you can probably still sell it. It's just going to be a limited number of buyers. It's not going to be to the widest market possible. All right, so we've gone through that. We haven't completely scared you off from selling. Let's talk about the process that we go through when we're soliciting buyers as agents. So I come from a theater and film production background before I got into real estate. And so I think a lot in terms of the narrative around this. Like a house is telling a story, a property is telling a story, and we want to tell a consistent story throughout. And so we set your home almost like you would a stage set. And we want to show who is living in this home, because everybody who's coming to look at it is aspiring to the lifestyle that you are presenting to them. And I mean, that's ideally, and if it's a home that you inherited and it hasn't been touched in 30 years, then obviously the story that we're telling is here's an opportunity for someone to come in and really make their mark on this home that has been lovingly maintained but not updated since 1985. So there's all different kinds of stories that property can tell. We want to make sure we're consistently telling the same one. So that includes your price. We want to price your home accordingly. So if it is a fixer upper, it should be priced, I mean, this sounds obvious, but it should be priced lower than similarly sized homes that have been completely renovated. It seems obvious, but you'd be surprised at how many people say, well, 5G sold for $869, so I should get $869 for 3G. Well, 3G has never been renovated since the building was built in 1964, and 5G was extensively renovated, and it sold in 2022 when interest rates were significantly lower. So those are things, if we priced it the same way as the one above, the expectations of the market, people would show up and they would expect to see something renovated. And if it didn't, you would lose all of those buyers. But you just want to make sure you're telling the same story. Similarly, if you underprice something, people will think something is wrong with it that is not wrong with it. And so getting your pricing right and telling the same story throughout. One of the things that we do at Realty Collective, we do our own staging. We stage with real actual furniture and things. And we do that because we find that virtual staging, which is really tempting to do if you have a home that maybe needs a little bit of updating or a vacant property, you want to skip the step of staging because you're like, wow, I can just show what will look like with furniture in it. When people are looking at a home online, that's where they first encounter it. They fall in love with these pictures. They get attached to the pictures. They obsess over the pictures. And if they show up at your home and it doesn't look like the pictures because all of the furniture in there was fake and generated by a computer, it is, again, just confusing to them. It throws them off, and we will lose buyers that way. So we want to tell the whole consistent story throughout, and we want those buyers, when they show up, to think this is the right price for the right property, and it's exactly what I thought I was coming to see when I showed up, and therefore now I'm ready to put in an offer. What are you doing? Right. Oh, offers. So they put in the offers, right? So if we do it all right, you should get offers within the first week of showing a home. Even in a rough market, if you're priced appropriately, you're going to get offers right away. There's so little inventory in New York right now that well-priced homes are selling quite quickly, actually, or are getting offers quite quickly, let's just say, because we'll get into how slow it is to sell everything in soon. But when you get offers in, oftentimes the first offer can be at or even sometimes over but very close to your initial asking price. And it's very tempting to think, oh, we mispriced it. We should have priced it higher because we're already getting offers close to the asking price. The first offer is oftentimes coming from somebody who's been in the market for a long time. They have been in a couple of bidding wars. They've missed out on things. They're serious and aggressive buyers. Take that first buyer really seriously. And if the first buyer comes in, or any buyer comes in with an offer price that is below what you'd be willing to take, always counter the offer. Don't be insulted. Some people approach it where they want to make a low offer because they just want to make sure they're not overpaying for the home. They want to go through the process of starting low and then bidding up to get to a higher number. Sometimes people who start low can be your best offers in the long run. So always counter, always negotiate. I mean, that's how we do it. And don't be mad or insulted if somebody comes in low. Sometimes that's just their process, and they're going to come up and be your buyer. Sometimes they're just jerks, and then we'll figure that out soon, but always counter to find out. Just want to make sure they're jerks. Don't just assume. So you have, we did a little bit of this already. So when you are going through this process and considering the offers, it's not just the price that you should consider. You should also consider the terms of the offer. So cash offer, those are going to be easier to close, generally speaking, than ones that require financing for a lot of the reasons that Rashidah just went into about the kinds of paperwork that a bank is going to have to review and approve. But a cash offer is usually going to be lower than an offer from somebody who is getting financing from a bank. If you're selling in a co-op, cash offer doesn't really make that much of a difference in terms of your timing. You still have to go through the process of applying, of submitting a massive co-op board package. And so, so cash doesn't necessarily mean speed when you're selling a co-op. But if you are selling a house or a condo, a cash sale may, if you need to get money quick, cash sale may be worth it to you, even if it's a slightly lower number. And then the other things that you should be prepared for are, if there are things that you've gone through your property and you know what, the HVAC system has been on the fritz, and we know that we're going to have to replace this. Be prepared in advance for certain places where you may either have to do repairs or offer concessions or credit or price adjustments after the home has gone through an inspection. So the biggest deal killer for all of this is time. So that's why you want to have all of these documents that Rashidah has mentioned. You want to have them all ready, because once you accept an offer, that clock starts ticking. So we accept an offer, we put together a deal sheet that says all the terms, and we send it off to the attorneys.
Yeah, so once that deal sheet gets, your attorney has to prepare a draft contract. So if your attorney has those documents in advance already, they can know that these things, they know the deed matches who's on the deal sheet. So we want to make sure we have that. If you're selling a co-op, your stock certificate and your proprietary lease. If you have a mortgage on the property, then you'll have a copy of it. If you don't have a mortgage, you should have your original. So your attorney will want to see at least copies of the stock certificate and the lease to make sure that names haven't changed, the correct individuals are on the property, so that they can put together that contract of sale and also just get ready for the closing. And just Tara, if you want to go to the next slide, I think that goes more into the due diligence and getting you into contract and the things that we do. So once we have that deal sheet and we have those documents, we can send out, as your attorney sends out, the contract of sale, typically within 24 hours of getting that deal sheet, if we have all of the paperwork necessary. If you're selling a co-op or a condo, the buyer side has to do due diligence on the building. And that normally takes about a week or two, depending on the co-op or the condo and the speed in which they get documents. So that's also why it's important as a seller, you have all of your co-op and condo documents, such as offering plan, house rules, financials, because that can go out to the attorney for the buyer with the deal sheet so they can start that due diligence. And as I said, that due diligence takes about a week. They have to do that first, then they sign the contract as the buyer, and then you sign the contract. If something comes up during that due diligence that they weren't aware of, that may derail them going into contract. So always important that you have that. I also ask clients to send me their latest mortgage maintenance statement, their latest mortgage statement. Important for maintenance as well is maybe there was a recent maintenance increase that may not have made it to the deal sheet. If you have a great realtor, then hopefully they know about that. But if not, then sometimes an assessment may have just popped up and is not on the deal sheet. You want to make sure that stuff goes into the contract of sale so that, once again, the buyer is aware of that when they're going to sign the contract. So that due diligence that the buyer's attorney is doing, due diligence that your attorney is doing by getting copies of those documents happen prior to signing. Once in contract, then the buyer is getting a mortgage. They have to work with their lender to do the underwriting and getting the mortgage commitment. And you as a seller really don't have much to do, but there's things that are happening behind the scenes, like the title search is being done. The title search is making sure there's no violations, no open permits. Even though your attorney did a preliminary kind of went over those things with you, there's a company that specifically has to do a search to confirm those things that are not on the property, because you have to give good title to the property. If it's a co-op, it's called a lien search, and that makes sure that there's any open mortgages have to be paid off at the closing. And your stock certificate and proprietary lease, those original documents have to be ordered in time so that they can come to the closing. Very important why you have an attorney that does real estate, because especially if it's a co-op, I would say that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that attorneys that don't do real estate make, as when I've seen as when they represent sellers, they don't order that stock certificate and proprietary lease. I have 2 horror stories with New Jersey attorneys that are practicing in New York, and despite me asking several times, they did, and now we had closings that had to get adjourned or things like that. But so you also, especially for co-ops, make sure that the attorney orders that stock certificate and get that from the payoff attorney, not from your lender, in time, because those original documents have to be brought to the closing. Your closing is roughly about 60 days. If you're selling a condo or a house, if there's financing involved, because it takes about 30 to 45 days to get the financing, then bank clearance to close. If it's an all cash deal, as Tina said, it happens a lot quicker. 30 days potentially, because they really just have to get the title to the property to make sure there's no title issues. If it's a co-op, you're looking at 60 to 90 days, sometimes more, if there's financing involved, because there's 2 stops periods that have to happen. As a seller, you're kind of waiting, but a lot of things is the buyer has to get the mortgage, the buyer has to get interviewed and approved by the co-op board. So that's why it takes 60 to 90 days for a co-op to close. So those are really kind of like your time frames that you're looking at once you're in contract and getting you to that closing table. Tina, I don't know if you have anything else to add as far as like
so I do. So
Mhm.
before you sign the contract, usually, if your buyers want to do an inspection, that's a piece that is then going to sort of follow you throughout the rest of the process. So that's again one of the reasons why we really want to know up front if there are any issues with the condition of the building prior to the inspection, because most purchases are going to be as is purchases in New York, and so the buyers need to know exactly what the actual condition is of the home that they're purchasing. But if there are issues that come up, if there is if your dishwasher is broken and not working, or if there are mechanical issues that we should know about, let's find out about those in advance and have a plan. So if the dishwasher isn't working at the time of the inspection, we can say, hey, we just found out that the dishwasher is not working, and by the time you close, that will have been repaired. Or we are proposing an $800 credit, so you can choose the dishwasher of your own choice. Whatever we have for, let's have a plan for it. But some stuff comes up in inspection that you didn't know about because you haven't looked underneath your floorboards recently or whatever. So it's always good to keep an open mind about what might get discovered in an inspection. And just because something comes up that seems bad doesn't mean that the deal can't move forward. But during that due diligence and contract period is when you would have a chance to address any of those concerns that are raised, either by giving money to the buyer or at closing, or by doing those repairs that need to happen. But no matter what you've done, when we go to the final walkthrough, which is within 48 hours of your scheduled closing, everything that has been agreed to in the contract in terms of the property condition has to be in evidence when they do the walkthrough. So before you close, you will have to have moved out of your home unless you have unless you need, for example, and this is very common, I'm seeing this regularly nowadays, is people who need the proceeds from the sale of their home in order to make their next move. And if that's the case for you, where you know you're going to be buying a condo, but you need to close on one property before you can complete the purchase on the other one, then we can occasionally do a post-closing possession agreement or a post-possession. I'll let Rashidah go to the many names of what that kind of a clause is.
Yeah. So like I said, one of the things in your contract is about your closing date. So your closing date is roughly, as I said, 60 days or 90 days. Standard contract has that the property has to be delivered vacant and broom clean in time for the closing, because the buyer does that walkthrough, as Tina had mentioned, within 48 hours prior to closing. However, there are circumstances, especially if you're buying and selling, where you need the proceeds from your sale in order to purchase your next property. So you don't have a place to stay in that interim. So you need a time period to stay in the property. Typically, it's a short time period, maybe 7 days. If it's longer than that, definitely have a conversation. But I would say it's kind of 7 days for most attorneys. They find that's okay. But if it's longer, then once again, this is something, conversation you should have with your attorney, have with the realtor, because that clause has to go into your contract of sale. It's always better to have that clause in there and not use it versus not having it. And then you're at the mercy of the seller on whether they're going to grant you that post-possession at the closing at that time. Because a post-possession means money has to be held back in escrow. There has to be payment of the carrying costs during that time period. There's additional provisions that have to be added to the contract of sale. So you want to make sure that if you think you're going to need that post-possession, whether it's you're moving out and you have to rent a place, that could be a reason because you need the proceeds for the rental, or maybe not, but you just don't want to move twice. So you want to have that, try to get that post-possession clause in there. As a seller, it's kind of also, I say escrows are not always the best things because your money is held back in escrow, which means that you're not getting all of your funds at closing. So a potential buyer can, even if you don't think they have reason to, they can say, oh, we're not authorizing the release of your money. And now you're held up weeks and months trying to fight for, whatever that amount that's held in escrow. So post-possession is a tool that's there, but as a seller, you really want to know that it's something that you absolutely need. And you want to make sure that if you stay in the property after the closing, that you do as much as possible to make sure that the property is vacant, there's no damage, you move out in time, because you don't want to give the buyer a reason to not release your funds within the time period. Because I can also tell you horror stories with possessions that we're holding on for years and have to go to court to get it released, and it's $500 arguing over something like that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, most attorneys don't want there to be anything that kind of survives the closing that is going to that's going to require more legal action later on. But if it is something that you absolutely need, I mean, I think that's the key to understanding this, is that selling your home is not like you're just getting on a conveyor belt and you have to go through a set of steps that are going to take a certain amount of time. You can tailor this process to a certain extent to fit your needs. And so I think a lot of people stress about selling because they think it's going to be a certain way. And it's just really important to be clear with your team what it is that you need to have come out of this, both what you need financially, and then also what you need in terms of physical supports for you as you go through the sort of end stages of the sale. We want to make sure that we're clear with everybody. We tell a consistent story to your buyers. If we know that you're going to have to live in the home for an extra 30 days after the closing for some reason, that's something we really want to be clear with people. We want to be clear about with people when they're submitting their offers. We don't have to tell people really before they're submitting their offers, but when they're submitting their offers, we definitely want people who are going to be able to take those things into consideration. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I feel like we've gone through it. We've gotten you through to the closing. Scheduling the closing is actually kind of complicated, and Rashidah, because there's so many people involved.
Mm-hmm. So in New York, your closings are done in person. So both the buyer side has to be there. If the buyer's getting a bank, has getting financing, their bank has to be there. If it's a house or a co-op, the title company attends. If a house or a condo, the title company attends. If it's a co-op, you have the management company or the co-op attorney attending, plus the payoff attorney. So there's all of these like roughly 7 to 10 different parties that have to assemble on this one day, on this time, to sign documents, exchange money, get keys, and transfer the property. So your attorney typically is working with the buyer's attorney to coordinate that closing with the various parties. And of course, making sure you're available, that the property's vacant and broom clean in time for the closing, or if there's a post-possession, that's understood as well. And then once all of that's done, the closing is actually scheduled, confirmed with all the parties. That email goes out. Your realtors will arrange to have a walkthrough done prior to the closing. As I said, sorry, lights just went out in the office. It's one of those things that, but if the closing, once it's scheduled, your attorney will handle that. If you can't attend the closing in person as a seller, you can speak with your attorney regarding power of attorney. That way you can sign this document, get it signed and notarized, and your attorney attends the closing on your behalf and signs the documents on your behalf. Or if it's a situation, you can pre-sign documents if they already know the closing date, and then just certain documents have to be signed at closing with the power of attorney. But as a seller, you don't necessarily need to be there, but you do have to at least give a power of attorney or pre-sign your documents, because original documents are needed at closings. They're not done electronically for closing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. If you are at any point during the period between accepted offer and closing, if you're going to be out of the country for a period of time, for example, like there are certain things that we actually need a physical signature for, especially when you're dealing with a co-op sale or something like that. So do let your team know if you're planning on being off the grid for some period of time, so we can make sure we've got everything ready for you to assign in it before it's necessary. All right, so I know we've got through. We have sort of 6 minutes left in our time. So we do have a lot of other resources. Obviously, this is just a gloss over what the whole process is like. But if you go to our website, we do have a lot of tips in our blog that are really helpful for sellers. We're also going to we have a seller's handbook that we can share with everybody, which is really specific to selling in New York City. And we've got video tips and tricks as well on the YouTube, where the youth are. And if you want to go check some of those out. And we all of our classes are uploaded onto our YouTube page as well. We'll send you a link for that. And so you can review old past episodes of Selling in Brooklyn, which reflect different kinds of market conditions, but have some of the same information. But if you also want to just watch one of our other videos, say, for example, you're selling and you're planning on buying, the Buying in Brooklyn series with Rashidah and Victoria Alexander and Lisa Yanchi from Cross Country Mortgage is pretty entertaining and educational. So I'm plugging buying as well as selling. And now we can also take questions in the chat if anybody has any, or we are also going to be giving you all of our contact information. If you want to reach out to us directly, we can do that as well. Oh, Tyler's going to connect to audio. No. Tyler, do you have a question? All right, well, we can take it off. Oh, wait, yeah. No, the question was, do you have any questions for us? Do you want to talk specifically about the property that you're considering selling? Historically, when we do these, some very interesting questions come up in the post-session Q&A. We're happy to get into it now, or to just talk to you another time privately if you prefer. Oh, okay. Great. Thank you. All right. Well, actually, I'm going to take, because we have a little bit of extra time. Rashidah, I've got a question for you about a new listing that we have in Brooklyn. So the sellers for this home were hoping to have a sort of extended post-possession. And one of the people who's come through to see it is a developer who said that they used to agree to these more commonly, but lately they've had a really hard time getting sellers to vacate the premises when they've signed it. Is this something that you have seen as well?
So that's why attorneys really hate these longer post-possessions. Because in New York, if you stay in a property more than 30 days, so 31 days, now it kind of falls under landlord-tenant purview. And even if you sign a post-possession agreement, which says that you're not creating a landlord-tenant situation, it still will have to go through that process if it's longer than 30 days, because less than 30 days is considered a license agreement. So you still have to go to court, but you don't have to deal with the landlord-tenant court in New York, which can be extremely frustrating versus going to a licensee, which you can get out quicker than a landlord-tenant situation. So that's really where it's really longer than 30 days is extremely frowned upon. We really want to have a lot of the money held back in escrow from the seller side, because if they become, a situation where they do have to go to court, whether it's Supreme Court, whether it's landlord tenant, the funds are being released and they have that money to get attorneys to go through that. And that's really what it is, because it is, even if you have an agreement, you can still force a person to go to court. And as I said, even with the post-possession, it's like you have it in there that it's released within a certain time period after possession has been given out. But if a buyer says, wait, this isn't broken, I don't want this money to be released. Even if it's, a $10 light bulb, you have $10,000 in escrow. You can't release that $10,000 until that issue is remedied. So that's why it's like great post-possessions there's a tool, but it can sometimes be even more of a headache for a seller versus just going into a hotel, putting your things in storage, getting your keys, and you worrying about things afterwards versus $10,000 of your funds held back in escrow. But yeah, as a developer, there is this, if it's longer than 30 days, it is that fine line. Now you have to go through a landlord-tenant situation versus just a licensee.
Yeah, I think that was interesting news for me today. The developer I was speaking to said that the issue seems to be that people have sold and they've miscalculated how much it's going to cost them to go into their next place. And so they're having people who've already sold their homes and are not finding anything, in part because there's such low inventory, but also because prices have stayed high and interest rates are high. And so people are having a hard time finding that next place. And so they're ending up squatting in their former homes, and the developer has to go through an eviction process that's taking, in some cases up to a year.
Yeah, 6 months at minimum.
Yeah. So, I was like, okay, that's a nightmare. And this feels kind of new to me in terms of the interest rates.
It's been there, but it hasn't always occurred. And typically, that's why when you have like a short post-possession, like 7 days, the seller already knows where they're moving to. So they're not really searching for anything. So it's like the shorter the post-possession, they already have a plan versus the longer. That means they really don't have a plan and they're looking. And that's where that now we have this uncertainty that comes into the mix.
Right. In that case, you can also just, if everybody is agreed, you can have a longer contract period, correct?
Yeah, your contract is on or about date. So if you know you're going to need a longer time to close, I had a client that, we put it on or about February 1st because they know they're going to need a longer time to close and, find places, and you can put in a contingency that is contingent on your sale or your purchase. So those are things that you can also work around if you need longer time periods, you haven't found a place. But once again, it's going to be about finding that buyer that's willing to work with you with the longer closing time period, because they know you're looking to find something and you haven't found a place that you're purchasing, or you're looking for a rental.
Oh, I had another thing come up today where I have clients who've been in contract for a couple of weeks. The sellers are moving out, and I got a note from the seller's agent saying, "Hey, these two chandeliers, we're packing, and this one was in the seller's grandmother's house and has real sentimental value, and this other one that's in the bedroom. Do your clients mind if we just take them?"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you know what? They do mind. And you didn't specifically exclude those things in the contract. And so they must convey with the property. I didn't say it in that way. But they didn't even offer, they didn't offer to replace them. They didn't offer and they didn't offer a credit for them. So we reached back out and said, we understand those have sentimental value. Are you proposing a credit for those? And we'll see what they say. But that's something I think is really important for sellers to understand. Sometimes they don't know that they're, those built-in bookcases are part of the home.
Yes.
And will convey. And if you want to take your built-in bookcases, if it's attached to the wall, it sells with the home unless you've specifically excluded it.
Yeah, so definitely that's one of the provisions in the contract. A sales standard contract will say appliances remain, built-ins, wall-to-wall, carpeting, those, so you want to be very specific. If you have specific chandeliers, you want to put that as an exclusion. If you have, something, furniture is excluded, like your clothes and your furniture is excluded, but in your contract, it will say appliances, air conditioning units, all of these things are included in the transaction. Fixtures, lighting fixtures are included. And yes, if you are excluding it, you want to put it that's going to be replaced by a standard builder's grade light fixture, so they just don't have wires coming out of that area. Also, the number of appliances. Sometimes a client may have 2 refrigerators or maybe a washer dryer that they may want to take with them, and that's covered under appliances. So the washer dryer is included. So as a seller, you always want to kind of take an inventory of things that you are, that is not standard, or even like just make sure you understand what appliances you're leaving, what appliances you're taking with you, and then also your lighting fixtures and stuff like that you want to, or even if you have furniture that you want to leave there, don't take it that you're going to leave it there. It has to be delivered vacant and broom clean. So if there's patio, furniture in the backyard, and you want to, they wouldn't mind keeping that. Have a conversation with the attorney, with your agent, on what is being left and what is being taken with you. So that's included in the contract as well.
Right. Don't assume that they want something just because you don't want to get it back out of the backyard. That is true. I have had to dispose of grills, luckily to good homes, but that were like, oh, it's a gift. It's not a gift. You have to negotiate that ahead of time. Although it can be a gift, but you have to get them to agree to it. All right. Any other things come up recently in your practice? Anything new for this?
That's really about appraisals are a big thing these days, making sure that, buyers are having issues with appraisals. So as a seller, maybe having to be flexible or understanding, there's ways you can appeal the appraisal. I've had 2 right now that the appraisals came in lower. So the agents are having the buyers go back to their bank to appeal the appraisal, the provisions, but that's something that's been coming up recently. I'm starting to see a lot more issues with appraisals that are happening. So, which would happen.
That's good to know. And I think that's one of the things that as a market shifts, sometimes it's harder for the appraisers to find comparable homes, because something that's sold 365 days ago in the same building, they may no longer consider that a comparable sale. Yeah. All right. Well, I could talk to you all day, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you soon about the deals that we're currently working on.
Mhm.
But unless you have anything else.
Nothing else. It's great to be in here and giving more insight, and we'll see each other at the next one as well for more insight on selling in Brooklyn, and see you at the closings and deals exactly in the future as well.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks so much. And thanks again to Farah for setting everything up for us.
Yeah, have a good one, everyone.
Okay. Take care.